Over in East Africa, revenues for the half year ending December for Portland Cement, they halved, going down from $30 million to barely 13.7. Now, part of that is a slowdown we're seeing in Kenya's real estate sector, but internal problems are as much a factor in play here. These are the markets. We'll keep you updated on those numbers. Here's what's coming up tonight. Mozambique sues Credit Suisse over a debt crisis. We'll bring you Saudi Arabia's plans to cushion its stock market. And Rome cleans up its act, one sweep at a time. Our starting point tonight, though, is South Africa, specifically the country's commodity sector. The Mineral Resources Department over there has recorded a 10% decrease in occupational fatalities. Recent data shows that 2018's total tally of mining deaths fell by 10% to 81 fatalities from 90 the year before. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola starting us off tonight.
The head of the mine inspectorate says a change in culture is urgently needed and it has to be broad-based if fatalities are to be reduced.
Our biggest areas of focus for us moving forward holistically is to ensure that there's a workable culture and behavior in the mines, including from the board level all the way to the workers, so that there should not be shortcuts taken to result in accidents and also occupational diseases.
Most union leaders speaking at the release of the safety data welcomed the transparent approach taken by the Minerals Minister. Others wanted more decisive action.
We call upon you, Minister, to work with us to amend Mine Health and Safety Act. Every mine that kills a worker, their CEOs must be put behind bars. Simple as that, must be prosecuted.
The Minerals Minister has a different view on prosecution of mine management.
Where a manager is negligent, that manager must be charged. Negligence. But when there's an accident, it can't be a formula that every time there's death, we must arrest. Actually, by now, we would be having 81 managers in prison. There will be nothing left to run the industry.
This business-like approach to the number of injuries, deaths and diseases isn't appreciated by the unions.
They are still killing our fathers and our sisters every day. If we are not killed, you've got diseases. If you escape diseases, your limbs are left underground.
With 81 people killed in the mining sector in South Africa last year, it's not a number to celebrate, but it's a move in the right direction. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Tshwane, South Africa.
On to Mozambique now. The country's government has filed an interesting case in London's High Court against Credit Suisse over what has now become known as the tuna bond scandal. The Swiss bank was one of the lenders that helped to arrange the $2 billion in government-guaranteed loans. These loans were initially hidden from the public, and their revelation tipped Mozambique into a debt crisis. Now, it is alleged that the Southern African state took out the credit in order to buy a tuna fishing fleet and civilian ships, but then turned around and hid that transaction from Parliament and international donors and lenders like the IMF. Credit Suisse has been sued along with the Abu Dhabi-based shipbuilder Privinvest, as well as 3 former Credit Suisse bankers who have already been indicted and are facing charges in the United States. Right, then a quick run through some company news. Dutch prosecutors are preparing criminal charges against Royal Dutch Shell over its $1.3 billion acquisition of the Nigerian offshore oil field in 2011 called OPL 245. Now, that decision ratchets up the pressure on the Anglo-Dutch oil major, which is already facing bribery charges in a trial in Milan over the exact same deal alongside Italy's oil giant Eni. Both oil companies have denied any wrongdoing. Nigeria's biggest listed firm, Dangote Cement, says that it has been in talks with several banks about floating shares in London. It expects the listing to happen sometime in 2020. The cement company said its listing plans are under consideration, but the banks to handle that sale are yet to be selected. The e-commerce platform Jumia has entered into a partnership with the smartphone maker Xiaomi. Now, the partnership will allow clients across Africa to buy the Chinese company's devices through the site. The deal comes at a time when Xiaomi is also considering setting up its first office in the Kenyan capital this year, amid a plan to counter the dominance of Chinese rivals, including Transsion Holdings. And the African telco MTN is projected to rise in profits, by as much as 90% in its 2018 results, and that's despite its financial woes in a range with a range of regulators from Uganda all the way to Nigeria. Last year, Nigeria's central bank was demanding over $8 billion. The firm still faces a $2.1 billion tax claim from the government over there. Uganda's government has not only expelled some of its staff, but is also probing claims that MTN Uganda is understating its revenues. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be taking you for a ride on the cryptocurrency roller coaster. And we'll also be telling you why Tanzania shut down several foreign exchange bureaus in Dar es Salaam. All that and more is coming up next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Nyang. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. So as we mentioned, let's refocus on one of the big stories in our bulletin tonight. Mozambique basically going to sue Credit Suisse in the High Court in London over $2 billion of debt that it procured, but at the time hid both from the public, from legislators, and from its creditors as well. So let's expand this conversation. Sumitra Naidu is in Johannesburg. Ollie Barrett is in London. Sumitra, let me start with you. What's the latest in the extradition case involving Mozambique's former finance minister, Manuel Chang?
So, Ramah, there's lots of confusion around his arrest because there's 2 warrants of arrest for him, one from the Mozambican government and one from the United States. Now, Chang was arrested on the 30th of December last year on a U.S. warrant. He was on his way to Dubai when he was arrested at the airport at ORT International here in Johannesburg. In terms of a U.S. warrant of arrest on allegations of conspiracy to commit fraud and taking millions of dollars in bribes in a $2 billion loan scandal. So last Friday, there was an extradition request coming through from Mozambique. So the matter couldn't actually be heard in court. The defense argued for the mandate to be extended. Last week, International Affairs also came out. International Affairs here in South Africa said that they would extradite Chang to Mozambique. That fell away. The Justice Minister here in South Africa will now need to decide which country the request for extradition will be granted. And it looks like the cases in terms of the U.S. and Mozambique will be held separately. The U.S. extradition request is going to be heard in court next week on the 5th of March. Ramah?
Indeed. Ollie, what more do we know about the terms of the suit that's been filed in London? What are the allegations being made here by the authorities in Mozambique?
Well, I wish I could set that out in huge detail for you, but there isn't a lot of detail as things stand. We know that this case is being brought in the commercial court here in London. We know that there are 10 defendants who are being named. Now, 3 of those are former Credit Suisse bankers who have been indicted in the United States in a case that was brought in January in the US, and they are awaiting still extradition hearings, extradition decisions here in the UK to make that decision about whether they will indeed be extradited to the US on those charges. The documents don't say a huge amount at this stage, merely that this is a case over commercial contracts. We know, of course, that these debt deals were partly arranged here in London, and so clearly that is one of the reasons why the case is being brought here. But as I say, not a huge amount of detail being set out in these court documents just yet.
Indeed, some pretty enticing prospects all the same, though. Sumitra, mid-last month, the eldest son of the former president, Ndambi Gobuza, he was detained by the authorities in Mozambique. Walk us through how he's connected to this $2 billion scandal.
So, Ramah, there was quite a big crackdown under the U.S. investigation. Gobuza was one of 8 people arrested that we know of. He apparently ran 2 companies linked to all of these fraudulent loans. It is alleged that he received $9.7 million in bribes, helping these companies in Mozambique to sell off old debts on international markets on behalf of the government. Now, the government and Parliament had no idea this was happening. Of course, these kinds of things run through the Finance Ministry or Treasury in any country, which is probably where the link with Mr. Chang comes in, the former Finance Minister. So it's alleged that while Gobuza was still the president, that's Gobuza Senior, apparently his son took out loans to buy a tuna shipping fleet, surveillance ships as well, you know, as you were saying in your intro. And an independent audit found that a quarter of that money had disappeared. The allegation is that all of that money went towards these bribes. That's basically all of the information that we're getting at this stage.
Right. Ollie, what's the precedent in English law, at least that would apply to this sort of thing, when it comes to dealing with fraudulently incurred debt? Are there other cases in the past where a debt contract has been ruled as being null and void because there was fraud or bribery involved in how that debt was acquired, particularly if it involves sovereigns?
Well, that's clearly what campaigners who have been campaigning on this very issue are really hoping now, and they're saying explicitly they hope that this will mean that this debt can be wiped out effectively, and so that the people on the hook for it, the Mozambican people, don't have to pay in terms of their contributions to the public purse. It's not without precedent, a case like this, but incredibly complicated it's going to be. Whatever it turns out the exact details of these court filings are, you could possibly expect a very long series of court proceedings here in London, which could get very messy indeed. If there are appeals that need to be played out as well, it could end up being some time before any of that debt is indeed wiped off or final decisions and judgments are made. So this is going to be a very, very complicated process indeed. The first stage of which is finding out exactly the details that we are taking forward here. But clearly, as I say, campaigners are looking at this issue, and they've been calling for some time for this debt to be, as you say, declared null and void, and they're hoping that this is the first step in that process, but a long way to go.
Indeed. One last question for you, Ollie. The UK's Financial Conduct Authority, as I understand it, had opened a probe into Credit Suisse's involvement in this debt deal back in 2016, but it later dropped that probe. Why?
Well, yeah, what it did was it changed the nature of the probe from being a criminal investigation into money laundering claims into a regulatory investigation. Now, what that means is that such a probe would have much less teeth in terms of what it could do. It wouldn't lead to a conviction and potential jail term for anyone found guilty. It would be more, decisions would be made about fines or bans for people working in the financial sector. The FCA here in the UK has long been criticised by politicians for not doing enough to get on top of criminal money laundering activities. It has long been accused by UK politicians for not focusing enough on the illicit money that flows through London as a global financial capital. So a deeply controversial decision that was at the time. The FCA didn't say a huge amount about why exactly it took that decision, but you would probably expect that it was taken because for some reason a decision was made that a criminal conviction was perhaps unlikely in that case from the FCA. They clearly decided for whatever reason, and they weren't particularly forthcoming about the reasons, that it was time to downgrade it to a regulatory probe rather than a criminal one.
Indeed. We'll see how all of this does play out. Fascinating story. Thank you for the details. I'm Richard Naidu in Johannesburg, South Africa, and Ollie Barrett in London. Now, let's move on to Botswana. It's offered to lend a neighbour in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, $95 million in private sector loans designed to help ease its economic crisis. Zimbabwe is currently in dire need of credit facilities to revive its strangled economy that has pretty much fallen apart over the last 20 years. Here's CGTN's Farai Mokutuya with the details.
An inaugural Zimbabwe-Botswana Binational Commission meeting ended Thursday with the signing of a series of agreements that will enhance cooperation in trade, mining, energy, science and technology. Botswana, which is seeking export-led growth, has put up a $1 billion Pula facility to support companies willing to set up shop in its investment-hungry neighbor. The two countries are also reported to have agreed on a credit line for Zimbabwe's private sector, a move that would be a vote of confidence in economic recovery efforts underway in Harare.
It will go a long way in supporting Zimbabwe's private sector, giving it much needed credit lines, but also in a way that will also be supportive of the reforms we have made in terms of currency reforms, the market-based exchange rate.
Since becoming president in November 2017, Emmerson Mnangagwa has sought investment and financial aid from the West, but has shifted focus closer to home, including economically smaller nations.
Trade and bilateral agreements are based on exchange of natural resources. It's a reciprocal agreement. I think it's the new concept of trying to exchange the little that we've got, especially amongst neighboring countries. We are not desperados as Zimbabwe, but it's the reality of regional economic integration.
Apart from giving a boost to intra-Africa trade, the recently concluded summit marks a new high for Zimbabwe-Botswana relations, which had been strained for over a decade due to political differences between the country's former leaders. Economic ties have dominated this binational commission. However, the restored fraternal relations will also see Botswana provide Zimbabwe with diplomatic and political support. Botswana has committed to assisting Zimbabwe's international re-engagement.
We continue to find solace and encouragement from the unequivocal support and solidarity from friends like Botswana with regards the call for the unconditional removal of the illegal sanctions imposed on our country.
US-imposed embargoes have stifled economic recovery and are blamed for negatively affecting ordinary Zimbabwean citizens. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The government of Tanzania has revoked the licenses and shut down a number of foreign exchange bureaus in the commercial capital of Dar es Salaam. The central bank over there says it decided to revoke the licenses of these companies, arguing they were operating, as far as it was concerned, illegally. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has the latest.
This week, the Central Bank of Tanzania decided to carry impromptu routine inspections of forex bureaus operating in Dar es Salaam cities. It was discovered that some of the bureaus were not operating in accordance to the forex business rules and regulations. As a result, the Central Bank of Tanzania started revoking trading licenses of all the bureaus that are not compliant with trading laws.
Anyone giving or using services at a bureau that does not follow the law will be met with severe legal action. Both sides who use this illegal black market will face the law.
Dar es Salaam is the third region of Tanzania that has faced forex crackdown in recent months. Last year, the government conducted similar surprise inspections in Arusha and Moshi regions. It was found that not only were some of the bureaus operating against regulations, but others were implicated in money laundering and being proxies for illicit financial flows. However, no one has been arrested so far, but the bank maintains that the investigation is still ongoing. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Right, then let's jump into something we've not actually covered in this program in quite a while. The second largest cryptocurrency in the world, Ethereum, underwent what's being described as a fork in industry parlance at the end of February. Essentially, it's a software upgrade designed to cut costs and the complexity involved in communications on its blockchain. Now, once the upgrade process is complete, miners should ideally spend less time and energy creating entirely new units of that cryptocurrency. That said, the last 12 months have been marked by a steady decline in the prices of crypto assets. Ethereum, for example, has shed over 80% of its value in dollar terms over that period. Bitcoin, perhaps the most famous of the cryptocurrencies, is a fraction of the near $20,000 highs that it hit at the end of 2017. Today, it was at $3,815. So then the question does become, is the crypto bull run effectively over and done with, or is this just one of those long pauses? Let's explore that argument with Richard D'Souza. He's a partner at Alcoin Trader. It's a crypto trading platform based in South Africa. He joins us now live from Johannesburg. Thank you for your time tonight, Richard. So Bitcoin down over 65%, Ethereum down over 84% in the last 12 months. Now that we're far from those 2017 peaks, is there as much interest in trading cryptocurrencies?
Well, what we've noticed is that we've seen this trend happen many times historically. It's certainly something that we can expect to see again in the future. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as a whole, there's many ways to measure the success of that matrix. And what we are noticing is that there's a huge upturn in the amount of transactions that are taking place on the network. We are getting more Bitcoin wallets month on month. In addition to that, we are seeing a lot more hash power on the network, which means the network is strengthening. So despite the bear market and despite the drastic dips in prices, we are still seeing a lot of good fundamentals in the crypto realm, and we are seeing a lot of interest in the industry.
Let's get a bit technical here. Yesterday, Ethereum underwent a series of what was described essentially as hard forks. So what changes were made to this, the second largest cryptocurrency, and why were they necessary?
What we saw with Ethereum is the 6th and the 7th upgrade to the protocol. These two forks were called Constantinople and St. Petersburg upgrades. So it is a hard fork technically, but we could consider it more of a blockchain upgrade or an Ethereum block upgrade. There was no additional coins made. Now, what we saw was a lot of improvements to security and a lot of improvements to the protocol of Ethereum. However, the only noticeable changes to the man in the street are probably the fact that the mining rewards from the miners have been dropped from 3 Ethereum down to 2 Ethereum, which is a 33% drop, which we can expect to have a positive effect on the price of Ethereum.
Right, so authorities in South Africa, as far as we can tell at this point, do not intend to ban the use or the trade of crypto assets, but they did put out this rather interesting consultation paper for comment last month. Did you have any input into that?
Well, the Reserve Bank and the fintech workshops that were held with all the industry players like ourselves were very insightful, and I think that the Reserve Bank and the fintech groups really looked at what we had to say and really addressed a lot of the issues that we had to say. These workshops, although the consultation paper, you've got till the 15th of March to finalize comments, I think a lot of those comments and a lot of our input came in those workshops. The workshops, as I said, are ongoing. So we have put in a lot of comment, and we feel that the way that the South African government is handling this is very positive to crypto. They have addressed the needs of a lot of industry players, and we're feeling positive about the space in South Africa.
Right, let's talk about a market that's not as welcoming, shall we say. Last September, Zimbabwe's finance minister took a rather optimistic view of crypto assets, and at the time he argued that the central bank should be studying the asset class and developing regulations to essentially let it thrive. And the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe has been pretty hostile to crypto assets entirely. So 5 months on, has anything changed in how crypto assets are used or traded in Zimbabwe based on the data you're seeing?
That's very interesting. I think what Professor Mthuli Ncube was saying when he put those positive comments about crypto is that the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe need to investigate it. And he was looking for solutions to the economic crisis in Zimbabwe. And one of the many solutions that he looked at was cryptocurrency. And that's why he seemed to have a positive stance on cryptocurrency. But to answer the question more directly, not much has happened in the 5 months that have passed. This topic is still under discussion. And I think that it is unlikely that we can expect to see any huge adoption of cryptocurrency in countries like Zimbabwe. That being said, Zimbabwe and countries like Argentina that have been failed by the traditional financial markets and traditional financial systems are a very positive place for crypto to take on mass adoption. But I don't think that we can really expect to see much happening in the near future.
All right, one last question for you. And this is now looking at the broader ecosystem, because one of the more interesting ideas that are being played around now involves tech companies like Facebook and Telegram trying to develop either their own cryptocurrencies or their own blockchain assets with a view to essentially moving money around the world. From the perspective of someone who's running essentially a trading platform, what is it about messaging services like Messenger or Telegram or WeChat for that matter that make them a sort of ideal partner or ideal host for crypto assets?
Well, if we look at WeChat and Alipay, for example, in China, because those two messaging platforms or social media platforms have mass adoption, they rolled out the WeChat wallet, which was and is very effective with fiat payments, traditional fiat payments. So the natural follow on to that would be using it to pay with cryptocurrencies. But as we know, the People's Bank of China is not very pro cryptocurrencies. So innovation in that area has been very stifled because of that reason, with the People's Bank of China actually banning cryptocurrency payments on platforms like Alipay and WeChat. But there are very exciting things happening. For example, Twitter, with its 350 million users, now has the ability to tip fellow Twitters with cryptocurrency. This platform is not native to Twitter, but is a Chrome add-on. So the CEO of Twitter making a couple announcements about that has been very exciting. And obviously because of that, people have started to adopt it. Cryptocurrency currently has about 40 million odd users, with Telegram having 350 million users. You can see why there's excitement about that in the crypto space.
Indeed. Always good to talk to you, Richard. Thank you very much for your insights tonight. Richard D'Souza there, partner from Altcoin Trader in Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, let's switch to a more traditional industry, if you will. Africa is home to roughly 13% of the world's population. There are about 1 billion or so of us around this continent. But we only account for a tiny fraction of global air travel. We account for barely 2% of total passenger traffic, at least going by last year's numbers. Now, the International Air Transport Association pointed out that if just 12 economies, 12, on the continent, fully opened up their airspace, it could add about $1.3 billion to the collective GDP. But doing this has been something countries on the continent have said repeatedly that they want to do, but so far they really haven't gone around to doing it. Now, one reason why Africa's contribution to global air traffic is so low is the fact that ticket prices relative to income are incredibly high. By IATA's calculations out today, in fact, it estimates that the cost of a return ticket is roughly equivalent to 3 weeks' worth of national income. And that's just for a return ticket within the continent of Africa. Now then, the latest effort to open up Africa's skies is a single air transport market. Let's explore what that entails and why it's still so expensive to fly around Africa with Ramah Nyang. He's the Secretary General of the African Airlines Association, who's with me in studio tonight. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address your audience this evening.
On aviation issues. It's something we love talking about on this program anyway. But let's start with the Yamoussoukro Declaration.
Okay.
Signed around the year 2000, a lot of drama and hype around it, but here we are, 2019, it's still not really in effect, and yet now we hear there's this effort to have the single air transportation market in Africa. So if Yamoussoukro didn't work, why will this new initiative work?
Because the single African air transport market is different from the Yamoussoukro Declaration, which was signed in 1988, followed by the decision in 1999. Yeah. The SATAM was launched 1 year ago in Addis Ababa. The difference is that now we have an executive agency with the power to implement the liberalization. We also have a legal framework. We have consumer protection rules. We have competition rules and a dispute settlement mechanism. And we have also an action plan for the implementation of the single African air transport market involving all stakeholders of the industry.
So essentially SATAM builds on what we learned from not implementing Yamoussoukro, for lack of a better word.
Yes, you are right. There was no legal framework to enforce the implementation of the Yamoussoukro decision. Now we have a legal framework, and we have so far 28 states which commit to implement the SATAM.
Right. But what about the question of bilateral, the fragmentation of the African aviation market? Because if one country, say for example Kenya Airways, wants to fly into Cameroon, for argument's sake, you've got to sign a bilateral air service agreement, agree on who can fly what, where, when and how, what are the frequencies of flights and so on and so forth. When you say you have this common executive body that will say, okay, here's what the fifth freedom rights, well, third all the way to fifth freedom rights, are going to be for all participating member states, how does that work in practice? Do they all have to adopt laws within their own constitutions, within their own parliaments or whatever, to essentially implement those?
Yes, in fact, the bilateral air service agreement come up just after the Second World War. The first one was signed by United States and UK after the war. And because you can understand that after the Second World War, the states wanted to have a sovereignty on their airspace. So after that, we realized that having many states, it is very difficult to improve air transport with bilateral air service agreement. It's constraining the relation between airlines. So in many regions, we are moving toward a multilateral air service agreement. And in Africa, we are proposing a multilateral air service agreement since last year. It had been adopted in Lomé during a ministerial working group.
Right, so where do taxes, because a lot of the reasons why ticket prices in this continent are so high is you look at the breakdown, and taxes, landing fees, takeoff fees, etc., they're so high. So you end up paying as much to fly, say, from Nairobi to Lusaka, or actually Livingstone, which cost me $900 last year. And that's a sort of, it's twice as much as I would pay to go to Dubai.
Yes, you are right. Today in Europe, you can fly 1 hour and a half for less than $100. In Africa, only the taxis range from $50 to $150. This is quite very high. And Africa is among the high regions in terms of taxes and charges in the world. And it's critical to bring the level of taxes at a lower level so that we can have fair tickets affordable for the majority of African citizens.
But then how do you approach that when you've got a lot of state-owned carriers operating across the continent? You've got Ethiopian, who have the biggest carrier on the continent. You've got Kenya Airways, who's operating here. And one of the main arguments KQ management say when we speak to them is, well, how am I supposed to compete with Ethiopian when I've got to pay all these taxes and landing fees, etc., etc., to a government parastatal? How do you bring these two markets into parity?
Yes, there is a need to have an economic regulator under the single African air transport market, because all operators need to be on a fair level so that the competition could be the same among African airlines.
Right. Along those lines again, because here's the thing, I'm putting myself in your shoes. I'm seeing you negotiating with, say, Rwanda or Tanzania, who invested fairly heavily in their state carriers not too long ago. And here you are saying, well, you guys should actually drop your taxes a bit. But then they would say, yeah, but we're trying to shield our markets here, right? There seems to be a bit of a, for lack of a better word, you're asking them to forego revenue here, aren't you?
Yes, you know, having high revenue, high taxes and charges, it is not promoting the growth of air transport. If you lower taxes and charges, you have seen that in other regions of the world, in the United States, in Europe. If you lower, you create a good condition for air operators, you will grow the traffic, and in overall, the revenue for the states will grow also.
Right. So let's go back to the commitment question. 28 countries have signed up to this. Have said with 28 countries. Right. So they've said we're going to implement this single African aviation market. What exactly does that entail? Once I say I've committed to SATM, what then must I do?
There is first a solemn commitment to the single air transport market. After that, you have 8 immediate concrete measures that should be implemented by the states.
And then do we look at legal changes that also have to be made in order to essentially embed those the multilateral air service agreements, for example, into local law?
Yes, there are some legal instruments to be enacted also. The multilateral air service agreement is one part of the immediate concrete measures for the implementation of the SATM.
Right.
So many states have already undertaken to implement these 8 measures toward the single African air transport market.
All right. Unfortunately, we're running out of time on this, but thank you very much for
your
time. Appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing what the aviation market looks like in another decade or so. Right then, time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll bring you details of Saudi Arabia's plans to cushion its equities market. And it may not be the apocalypse, but some Brits are stocking up on food supplies. Of course, it has to do with Brexit. We'll tell you more about that when we come back.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Somalia, special forces over there have killed the last of the 3 gunmen who had taken over a building in central Mogadishu. The attack, which killed 20 people, started late on Thursday. It was carried out by Al-Shabaab militants in an area lined with hotels, shops and restaurants. South Africa's cabinet has announced the approval of long-awaited national action plan to combat racial discrimination and xenophobia within the state. South Africa has registered a spike in racism-related events, much of which continues to polarize different communities and races throughout the country. Over in East Africa, Ethiopia and Kenya have agreed to benefit the East African region by strengthening their political and economic ties in the years to come. President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta is holding a two-day official visit to Ethiopia, and he has engaged in talks with the country's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali. Both leaders have vowed to bolster trade and bilateral investment ties as well. That's a wrap of your headlines. Now, 2019 is set to be a rather large year for equity markets in Saudi Arabia. In a phased entry, the country is getting emerging market status from the FTSE Russell in March. Later on in the year, it'll join the MSCI benchmark too. Jacob Greaves reports on the anticipated impact.
Saudi Arabia's main index is already having a good start to 2019. Fund flows have risen ahead of its entry into emerging market benchmarks, and that trend is expected to continue.
We're expecting a passive flows about $15 to $16 billion from funds tracking FTSE and MSCI indices. And these flows will come in over the next 12 months, going up to March 2020. And we think this is going to be very supportive for the stocks, particularly the banking sector.
In March, the Saudi exchange will begin the first phase of joining the FTSE Russell benchmark. When completed, the country's forecast to account for 2.7% of the index. Some neighbours, such as here in the UAE, already have emerging market status. When Saudi Arabia joins, it's set to bolster its regional presence. Indeed, when all's said and done, it's likely to be the largest Middle East market on FTSE Russell's emerging market index. Later will come exposure for Saudi stocks on the MSCI benchmark. Both are set to open the kingdom up to more direct foreign investment.
They did a lot of liberalisation in terms of laws that were restricting foreign investment, and certainly the inclusion in the indices opens up a number of fund investments which wouldn't otherwise have found their way into the Saudi equity market. So from that perspective, it's been quite positive in attracting portfolio inflows. But I think what's more relevant for Saudi Arabia going forward is the ability to attract FDI and real investment into the economy to help push the diversification efforts further ahead.
And that goes to the heart of ongoing reforms in Saudi Arabia. The country is attempting to wean its economy off a reliance on oil and gas. Increasing foreign investment is central to that. Spurred by the changes coming in 2019, the kingdom could soon rule regional emerging markets. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
The latest round of trade talks between China and the United States has wrapped up in Washington, D.C. They were led by the Vice Premier of China, Liu He. The Chinese delegation met with the U.S. President Donald Trump. China's Commerce Ministry says that the talks did yield substantial progress. Here's CGTN's Wang Wei with more.
Following trade talks with the U.S. President Donald Trump, Chinese Vice Premier Liu He discussed trade with the U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin and Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. After a two-day extension to the negotiations, the Chinese Commerce Ministry felt both sides made progress.
The two teams further implemented their leaders' consensuses. They focused on the text of the agreement and made great strides on specific issues like technology transfers, intellectual property protection, non-tariff barriers and currency rates.
While meeting Liu, Trump called bilateral ties between the two countries extremely important, adding that they are at a good status. He said this round of talks had made remarkable progress and that the U.S. is willing to work with China to achieve more strong results. Trump also said he expects to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in the near future to sign the agreement. At least one expert is also optimistic about the resolve of the trade dispute.
They had in-depth discussions on structural issues. It's all in line with where China's economic reform is heading. The two countries have differences in the reform's approaches and pace, but they have gradually reached more agreements.
The China-U.S. trade dispute was triggered last March by America's 301 investigation into China's trade practices and the treatment of intellectual property. Despite 4 rounds of earlier negotiations, the disputes escalated into a war. In July, the two sides started imposing additional tariffs on each other as high as 25% on $50 billion worth of goods. The U.S. later imposed an extra 10% on $200 billion in Chinese goods, while China retaliated with 10% tariffs on $60 billion in U.S. exports to China. The two countries' list covered nearly all categories of the other side's exports. December 1st became a turning point when the presidents of both nations met at the G20 summit in Argentina. They reached the 90-day truce and decided to negotiate during this period, while pausing tariff increases. Since then, the U.S. and China have held another 3 rounds of negotiations. Despite all the ups and downs, one expert says the unbreakable economic ties have prompted the two to reconcile.
Since 1979, the two countries have had 40 years of economic engagement. They've taken interest in each other, but there are also structural problems. So this trade spat was the result of the accumulation of these problems. But the economic and trade connections based on the market will not go away. This is what makes the two countries finally coming back to the negotiating table to resolve the dispute.
U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted that he will postpone the deadline of the 90-day truce and won't increase tariff during this period. Experts believe it will allow more time for the two teams to work on the agreement. It shows that Trump is willing to negotiate rather than threaten more tariffs. It also shows that the negotiations are deep and systematic, and the teams are working on details. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
Now then, as worries about a no-deal Brexit do mount, remember it's just 28 days away, many in the UK are actually starting to stock up on food and other daily necessities. Concerns are rising that there could be short-term disruptions to the country's food supply if a no-deal exit does happen. CGTN's Shesheng explains.
It's not the apocalypse, but a no-deal Brexit means the end of the world where the UK enjoys full benefit from EU customs rules. The immediate possible impact could be food shortages, as custom checks at the British border may suddenly reappear on March 29th, the day Britain leaves the European Union. Let's take a closer look at the boxes containing emergency supplies. Each of them contains 60 servings of main meals and 48 portions of meat to last 30 days, a water filter, a fire starter, and energy gels.
Then we have things like this, which is our tins. And these tins, they have a 25-year shelf life, so if you don't need to use it, they can be easily stored for an emergency in the future. So you've got all the meats, pastas, the sauces, etc. Everything you would cook in a normal sort of spaghetti bolognese type meal would be in here. So it is quite a nutritional meal, and it is designed for emergency environments. But it does taste good too.
The Brexit box is priced at £295, that's nearly $400. They can only be ordered online. The company reports that they have sold over 600 boxes since they launched the product mid-December last year. The question is, will possible food shortages cause a rise in British inflation?
And this is a real worry. Something like 40% of Britain's food comes into the UK from the EU. And basically, if the UK is no longer in the European single market, then introducing those border controls is going to cause disruption, and it's going to mean that there is going to be some shortages of food to the UK in some particular types of food.
And the UK is walking into a recession.
We're likely to see short-term disruption in the economy. It's likely the UK is probably going to enter into a temporary recession. These impact businesses. There's also going to be potentially some short-term impacts on potentially getting some foods and some medicines to and from the UK.
What's more concerning is that Brexit would take a toll on businesses and stop them from hiring. That would be a huge irony, as the referendum for Brexit was to get British jobs back. Xia Cheng, CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices for you. Brent crude still holding orbit in the $66 a barrel range. Ironically, though, OPEC and its allies are getting help in cutting supply from the very same country whose president was asking for less cuts, not more. Bloomberg's data is indicating that roughly half of the fall in output in Feb was actually down to sanctions on Iran, courtesy of the US, and unplanned production outages in Venezuela. Collectively, OPEC's taken about 560,000 barrels of crude off the market, and they're doing exactly what they said they would. in December last year. Here's what's coming up next. We are at the 23rd International Trade Fair in the Ghanaian capital. And Rome is cleaning up its act one sweep at a time.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Made in Ghana might not be an internationally known phrase just yet, but one trade event in the country is trying to change that. The event is International Trade Fair in Accra. It's got a number of SMEs and foreign companies right in attendance. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Over 600 local and foreign businesses have descended on Accra. Gladys Nso has come all the way from the northern region of Ghana to exhibit her clothing here. She wants her made-in-Ghana products to find customers around the world.
There are people who are around. They don't know that we have things like this here. They don't know that we have things like this in Ghana. Apart from the smokes and other things, we have the shares that they don't know that we have them. So when they host a program like this and they come to know that we have things like this, after the fair, even when they don't buy, but after the fair they buy.
For Abdul Raj, the trade fair gives him the opportunity to introduce his solar products. His company is linked to a Germany-based industry that is helping set up a manufacturing plant for the solar products to be made right here in Ghana.
It's been very easy to establish a presence in Ghana when we brought the products in, but we have evolved. We now produce some of these things in Asia under OEM agreement, especially with China, Hong Kong, and other countries.
This year's trade fair is not only serving as a platform to promote made-in-Ghana goods. Exhibitors here, both local and foreign, are looking at ways to form partnerships to promote their businesses.
Ghana was West Africa's largest recipient of foreign direct investment in 2018, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development's latest report. International trade fairs like this are aimed at keeping that trend going.
Seeing a lot more foreign direct investment coming to the manufacturing space, and this is the place where they will show the goods that they have actually produced, and to enable other investors come and have a look, or people with trade ambitions come and have a look.
If you're exhibiting here and similar products are being exhibited, you get to see those similar products. You compare to yours, you see where you can tweak yours a little bit, you can improve yours so that you can be in the competition. So in so many respects, it brings a lot of opportunity to the companies that are exhibiting.
The International Trade Fair lasts for next 2 weeks. For these local small and medium-scale businesses and foreign companies exhibiting their goods and services, they are building their businesses and networking to learn from one another. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
The Italian capital of Rome is a city full of history and glory, but some locals are stressing that the city is not really being taken care of properly. An NGO over there has launched hopes to boost civic action and support the city to once again return it to its days of splendor. Here's CGTN's Michal Bar-David with more.
Rome is a city known for its glory. The city has undeniable beauty. History and culture can be felt and appreciated at literally every corner. Its ancient monuments, such as the Colosseum, are visited by thousands of people every year. Though tourists may still cherish the attractions of a once glorious city, local residents are noticing some imperfections. like garbage left on street corners, buildings sprayed with graffiti, and neglected roadways. Many locals also feel the effects.
Even the trees fell in the last days due to the lack of maintenance. There's garbage everywhere. The streets are not clean. We cannot compare ourselves with any other European capital.
Very bad now and bad for the last few years. I would like to run away tomorrow, but my work is preventing me.
Sometimes there may be services that are short in supply, or late buses and closed metro stops. But Rome is always Rome, and I feel good here.
Some locals in Rome are so fed up of seeing their hometown, a city they love, rotting away, they decided to take matters into their own hands. An NGO was launched by such citizens with a title matching their cause: Retake Rome.
Retake Rome, a non-government agency, was founded by Rebecca Spitzmiller and has since formed 90 neighborhood groups in Rome.
Our motto is speak up, clean up, grow up. But first you have to wake up. So we try to raise awareness about the problem of living in a city that is slowly decaying because nobody cares. And once you notice that, wake up, then you start talking about it, because it's not something that you should ignore. It's not normal.
Members of the group handle all kinds of jobs. They collect trash, clean graffiti, remove illegal banners off building walls, and also clean the streets. The group has also started school outreach educational programs for future generations.
We teach them the difference between art and vandalism. The main difference being art is legal. If you get permission to paint on a wall, fantastic. If you don't, it's a crime.
One of the volunteers, Melissa, says she's passionate about the organization.
I feel happy and I feel that I have the rights to keep my place nice, and I contribute to its beauty and its security as well, because a place that looks tidy and a place that looks cared, it's a place where you walk and you feel safer.
Retake Rome has been so successful, it has expanded to 40 other cities in Italy with 50,000 members on their social media platforms. Michal Bardavid, CGTN, Rome.
All right, then a run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. Let's focus on the Kenyan shilling for the time being. It's been flirting with that 99 to the dollar level for most of this week. Now, we'll see if it actually sticks to that and continues as March rolls in. But here's something you fund managers can look forward to. There's a $500 million 25-year infrastructure bond coming your way on the 20th of March. Expected coupon rate of about 12% or so, and that's going to be tax-free, by the way, once it does come to market. These are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. Do remember, you can send your feedback on all the content you've seen on the screen here tonight. We'd like to hear all of it, good and bad. Send it all to the contacts on your screen right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. This has been Global Business Africa. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.